You're saying this is a domino effect where it was Evan last month. It could be any foreign correspondent in Russia. What are the implications here then for the free press in Russia? Is that door essentially shut?
It's the situation, especially the charges on Evan, are very similar to the Cold War practices that the Soviet Union had. Of course, nowadays with the technologies, it's not possible to put an iron curtain between Russia and the rest of the world, especially Europe, because the information will still get out. There is the internet, there are messaging apps. Although for Russians, it's been impossible to access certain social media or websites, and they have to use VPN, and not all VPNs work. Not everybody knows how to use VPNs, and Russians have been very methodically trying to isolate the Russian internet from the rest of the world. So it's not an absolute isolation, but it is there are fewer and fewer voices, independent voices, that we hear from inside Russia, including through foreign media outlets that have correspondents in Russia.
If it's not an iron curtain, but we are hearing fewer voices, then what do you think the future is for foreign correspondents in Russia?
The future is very precarious. I'm sure that when foreign correspondents based in Moscow heard about Evan's detention almost 2 weeks ago, they immediately started thinking whether they should leave Russia as well. I heard about some journalists who decided to leave. I spoke to some of them personally, and a lot of newsrooms are considering whether they should keep their journalists or not. One journalist even said that it would probably be safer for foreign correspondents working in Russia to have a minder, like in the Soviet times when they had a KGB officer following them at all times, practically 24/7, because then if any charges are brought, then they wouldn't be made up as much as without a minder. So there are discussions like that, which for us, based in the United States, may seem ridiculous. But it's safe to say that every phone is bugged, everyone is followed in one way or the other, maybe not necessarily physically, but surveilled digitally. And it's not safe for foreign journalists to work in Russia. But it's also, one of the goals of the Russian authorities from this case is to sow fear among Russians, because from now on, any Russian who maybe until 2 weeks ago would be willing to speak to a foreign correspondent who would show them their press card or accreditation with the Russian Foreign Ministry, now would probably not do that, just thinking, oh, that guy from the Wall Street Journal turned out to be a spy. What if this one is also a spy? I'm better off if I don't speak to them. And that's exactly what is concerning about this situation, because journalists like Evan Gershkovich provided that platform for ordinary Russians to be heard.
You're painting a really scary picture to be a foreign correspondent today in Russia. You said it's not safe. Best case scenario, your phone's bugged. Worst case scenario, you're detained, or even worse. Do you think point blank newsrooms in the West, specifically in the United States, should start pulling their correspondents and journalists from Russia out?
As I said, I'm sure newsrooms have been discussing it. Actually, the first time they started talking about it and reaching out to CPJ was in March and April last year, because soon after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started, the Russian authorities started amending their legislation, making it practically impossible to report independently about the conflict in Ukraine. They banned the use of the word war, for example, and it was easy to get charged with distributing fakes if you reported on the Russian army or other state agencies' activities abroad, including in Ukraine. And at the time, newsrooms were consulting their safety experts and lawyers to see the impact of those changes in Russian legislation on them. And some newsrooms, some media outlets pulled their correspondents out of Russia, and some of them went back. But it is clear that after Evan's case, it won't be just some technical reasons for which the Russian authorities will expel journalists. It will be something very serious. And also, the second part of my answer is that it also depends on what media outlet the journalist represents. Because the other day I checked the foreign ministry, the Russian foreign ministry website for the list of all accredited journalists. And the list is quite extensive. It includes journalists from many different countries, from Belarus to China, from Armenia and Kazakhstan to Vietnam. There are European media outlets who have correspondents in Russia. I think Evan was targeted in this predatory way exactly because he is from the United States. So we're basically going to the beginning of our conversation about the relationships between Russia and the West, and how Russia sees the West and the Western hand in the war in Ukraine. So journalists representing media outlets from those countries that have been supportive of Ukraine, that have been providing aid to Ukraine, that have been critical of Russia, Russia's human rights and press freedom record, those journalists are more vulnerable. They are on the first line of this repressive machine.